Hey guys, it's Taylor. You're listening to Fearless Unscripted. I'm your host, Taylor Peters. Thanks so much for listening. And I am excited to get a chance to spend some time with Brandon Weaver today, a man of many talents. I don't know if I can give you an adequate introduction, so I just want to say welcome to Fearless Unscripted.
Well, thank you for having me.
You are a writer, you're a podcast host, you're a good friend of Texas Tech and our College of Media and Communication, and in particular with Jerod Foster, and you've had an opportunity to really be immersed in a lot of the things that they're doing there within the college, and that's the main reason that we want to talk to you today. But you're just such an interesting and fascinating person, and you have such a unique story. But I wonder if we might start with where we are right now. You and I are having a conversation just outside of Post. Tell me about this property that we're on and what's unique about it to you.
Yeah, just to clarify, this is not my home. So I don't live in a dated 1999
You
home.
could. I'm about to fall asleep on this couch. It's so comfortable.
With some patchwork furniture. So we are at my family's ranch, Caprock Gap, on the Caprock Escarpment. And we're outside it. We're probably 45 minutes outside of Post. So the Caprock Escarpment, I grew up in Snyder, not too far from here. And when we would drive from Snyder to Lubbock, because Snyder's, you would exhaust the restaurant supply in Snyder pretty quickly. And so my family would drive to Lubbock and we would hit Furr's Pie Kitchen, Furr's Cafeteria, Taco Villa. You know, if you're from outside of Lubbock, you say Taco Villa, which drives me crazy.
Me too.
It's Taco Villa.
No offense to anybody who calls it Taco Villa. But.
Well, I will. Yeah, email me. It's Taco Villa, folks. Jerod Foster says Taco Villa. But
he would.
We would drive past the Caprock Escarpment, and there's a big mesa on the other side. We call it Flat Top Mountain. There's no real name for it. I've looked on the geological maps. We just call it Flat Top Mountain. And as a kid, an adventuresome kid that didn't have access to woods, mesquite trees, that's all we had. This area was always spurred my sense of adventure. I wanted to see the Caprock. I wanted to be out on the Caprock. Every kid I know that was adventurous like me loved the Cap. It was just kind of this mystique. And all kinds of stuff happens out here. When I was a kid, they had a B-1B bomber crash out here.
Wow.
We're going to get to a little I don't want to say dark, but a doctor had murdered his wife and dumped her body out on the Caprock. So there's like all this Caprock lore. So this place has always been really special, but we didn't have any land out here. Most of this land was locked up with like 2 family ranches, the Parks and the Millers. And so as a kid driving by, I would just always, my parents said, well, this used to be an ancient seabed. So all those mesas and the Caprock Escarpment, that was like next to an old seabed. And you still see shells out here. You'll find caliche with shells and limestone embedded in them. And some of the rock faces just have tons and tons of shells and fossils in them. It's really neat. So this piece of land came up for sale, 1,400 acres, in like 2003. And my mom purchased it. Just as a place for my family has an oil field company, a place to entertain clients and do hunts and stuff. And so she bought it from the Millers. And, I mean, as soon as we closed on it, I was out here. It wasn't quite as developed as it is now. The roads, there was a double-track road. You could get into the entrance where y'all came in, but the double-track road followed, I think it's called Griffith Creek. This is Griffith Canyon, what we're sitting in. And, I mean, if it had rained, you didn't get in the back of the property. And so when we first bought it, I came out here and just walked every ledge of the Cap. I'd come out different times and just bushwhack. It was cold, so I didn't want to get bit by a rattlesnake. But we would just explore, and I mean, there's all kinds of features up there. If you're driving down 84 and you look at the Cap, it looks pretty featureless. Just cedars and some rock. But you start climbing in it and exploring, and there's aoudad out here, and there's mule deer, some pretty big mule deer. And so that's where we are now. We're at my family's hunting ranch. It's where we all recreate sometimes. And my brother and sister bring their kids for Thanksgiving out here. And it's pretty rustic, as you saw. We're in a fifth wheel. We're in I think this thing was bought in the early 2000s. And there's a metal building that it sits under, and that's all we have out here.
That's great.
There's no well. There's no water well. We truck water in because, excuse me, if you drill a water well out here, you'll get probably 100 gallons per minute of salt water.
Oh,
that's all that's here.
Wow.
We've drilled deep.
It's so neat, though, because this is kind of like, it just really puts you, when something is simplified, it like puts you just really connected with your environment. And when I think about, and when I read the type of work that you do, and I listen to your podcast, and I know the type of experiences that you've had with Jerod, it just is really neat to me that this place kind of embodies a lot of what I think your life pursuits are, and your like just immersion with nature. Would you say that that's right? Is that something that you like to pursue in your life endeavors?
Yeah. Yeah, this place, so I've lived in Colorado, I've had access to public land, but this area of Texas, this spot has my heart, and I don't know if it's because it set the foundation of wonder and awe, driving by it and looking at it. And then I guess I was probably in my late 30s when we bought it, or mid 30s, and started exploring it. I mean, I would just come out here and just be so full of life and excitement and I mean, I've been in the backcountry of the San Juan Mountains, and I know you travel and do some hunting and see some wild things, but I don't know. I think a lot of people might drive by this and just sell it short and maybe not give it a second glance. And so that's kind of where my theme in my work primarily is finding the adventure in the unexpected places. And Jerod and I have just clicked on that. I mean, he keyed in on that, and he and I did a bike trip from Portales, New Mexico to Lubbock. We stayed at the Muleshoe Wildlife Refuge. I've told this story on my podcast a million times. When he pitched the story to me, I go, okay, so we're riding from Portales to Lubbock, and we're going to stay in Muleshoe. He goes, not Muleshoe, Muleshoe Wildlife Refuge. And I'm like, never heard of this place? I can't imagine. All right, I trust you. And I had just moved back from Colorado. And I'm like, I'm riding a bike through the middle.
A bicycle.
Bicycle, yeah. through just some pretty featureless land. But we were on back roads and gravel roads, and we were alone that whole trip. And I think we saw maybe 3 or 4 cars the whole trip. And I kind of coined this idea of like, man, we were in solitude surrounded by people. Because there's little ranch houses here and there. But it just really set this riding career 2.0 that I started, because I'd been a rider in the early 2000s and quit, and met Jerod and kind of relaunched this riding career in my late 40s. Great time his magazines are dying. And I became really, really passionate and curious about the rest of Texas that I didn't know anything about. I grew up in Texas, but at that point I had never seen our national forests. And this was federal land that we stayed on. The Muleshoe Wildlife Refuge was established in the 30s, and about the time of the Depression, and I'm assuming land was worthless, and so the land has never seen a plow. It's your native grasses. It's a flyover for the cranes, sandhill cranes. And I was like, well, I did not know this existed. I didn't know we had that, because outdoorsy Texans like to lament, we don't have any public land. We need more public land. Well, have you seen our public land that we do have?
Yeah.
Because it's pretty special.
Right.
And the stark contrast of not having that and seeing what we do have, the national forests, I'm like, unbelievable. And then to find out why they exist in the rest of the grasslands. So I did a trip for Texas Highways for their website, and I drove from the grasslands up in the Rita Blanca grasslands there in New Mexico, in the Panhandle, to the Caddo grasslands, stayed at Meredith Lake. So I just hit federal land all the way, and ended up in the national forests. So I called it dirtbagging our public lands. So I slept in my pickup, because dirtbagging is a term that you hear in the West, especially the 20-something students that I've worked with. A lot of them will go dirtbag, just go live out of their cars in Colorado and Montana. And that's a term that's not really said in Texas. If you're a dirtbag in Texas, you're probably really,
It means something else.
Yeah, it does. And so I was really surprised that Texas Highways picked it up. But I spent a week in my pickup living on federal land, not paying $1 for camping.
Wow.
Paid nothing.
Wow. The reason that I had asked you to kind of clarify when I said bicycle or motorcycle, because you have had some really important experiences with Jerod through his work with the College of Media and Communication in kind of both of those capacities, through Adventure Media and then also through the Great Plains Project, which is maybe it's one of the most recent endeavors that you've had with the college. And I wonder if you might just kind of, for anybody that's listening who's unfamiliar with what the Great Plains Project is, how would you explain that effort and where that idea was sort of born from? What was it? What did you guys do?
It's really a culmination of what I was talking about and what we were doing separately before we met, because he and I talked about it on this trip, actually talked about it on my podcast, you know what, I really don't know how his love of I think he read what's the book? It's the about the Great Plains. I'll think about it here in a second. American Serengeti. Thank you so much.
Good job, Shaylin.
Golly.
I'm okay giving you a shout out because Shaylin is the real MVP. No offense, you guys.
Yeah. I found this when I do my podcast, things that are very known to me, I will forget. You just like, because you're trying to have the conversation. Yeah, American Serengeti. And he read that, and I think it kind of spurred this love of the Great Plains and how important it is. And so about when we met in 2018, him and Simon Parmley, Justin Rex, and I think Jerod's brother might have been a part of it. They went and did a little video along some gravel roads up in the panhandle of Texas, following a route of the Great Plains, kind of a primer to what this actually became. And Jerod has laid out a backpacking bicycle, so camping off your bicycle, route from the Texas-Mexico border to the Canadian border, up the Great Plains, to highlight this vast ecosystem that people aren't aware of, and that, what people call flyover country, there's grand adventures to be had there. And so he's laid out this route, and he started working with people in other states to basically lay out the route in their state, Kansas, Oklahoma, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska. And so it's a bicycle camping route, and they've pieced it together all on gravel roads, and they have areas to camp, camping suggestions, and we wanted to do it on bicycles. That was the ultimate goal. Actually, he wanted to. I don't know if I ever want to ride a bicycle up.
I don't blame you.
I don't think I can spend 3 months on the bicycle as much as I love it. And so we needed to vet the route, to connect the roads and see, because you can do it on we have this software called Ride with GPS, and you can zoom in and look at gravel roads, but sometimes they don't go anywhere. Sometimes it's private property. They're not labeled very well. So we needed to ride the whole route, and we didn't have time to do it on bicycles. Well, I am a big motorcyclist. The motorcycle, it's something I can do. I'm decent at, and it's something I could do as a kid that made me cool. And I wasn't a cool kid. I wasn't very athletic. So I've been riding a motorcycle since I was like 8. My granddad, who introduced me, well, he didn't. He introduced me to hunting. He never took me hunting. But he bought me my first motorcycle, and probably 8 or 10. And so that's just always been a go-to for me. It's been like second nature. How some boys can throw a football, which I don't throw a football very well. In fact, if you throw me a football, I might just hand it to you because if it's small one, I can get a good spiral on it. But anyways, the motorcycle has always been there for me. And so when Jerod and I first started doing stories, I told him all these ideas I'd had, all these ideas that had brewing the 10 years that I'd stopped being a writer, and because I'm full of ideas. I said, I'm going to do a motorcycle trip across Texas from the coast to Guadalupe Mountains, sea to summit. Because when people think Texas, they don't think mountains or ocean, really.
Yeah.
So we did this story for Texas Parks and Wildlife, and it just morphed into this idea he had to ride a bicycle from up the Great Plains, 3,500 miles. We could do it on motorcycles and have a very similar adventure, very tactile adventure.
Yeah.
Smell the air, feel the coldness and the dryness and the heat and cold. We could do it on motorcycles in a lot less time and still get back and see our families and still have lives, and we have professional responsibilities. So the Great Plains Project, we've talked about it for years, and it just morphed into, let's vet it on motorcycles.
Yeah.
And if Jerod wants to do something, he'll figure out how to make it happen. And so he orchestrated with Texas Tech Public Media and turned it into a class where we had a student film crew where they were interns for basically a production company.
Yeah.
And they followed us riding motorcycles up the middle of America.
And Jerod really has just this knack, this natural ability of being able to take something that he cares about and believes in and create experiential learning opportunities for students. It's something that he's really good at, right? And the Great Plains Project and Adventure Media both are like great representations of that effort. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned Simon Parmley, who led that project with Maddie Walker, who is a Texas Tech graduate. And then Justin Rex, you've mentioned him, obviously someone that you've known for a long time. Michael Ortiz, who is also part of, he worked with Jerod Foster for years. He's been on Adventure Media. He's been part of the first Great Plains Project. And, he's a member of our video team who went to go and like share the experience of what this does for students. And so you kind of have this like unique blend of Simon and his group creating one documentary that's about the Great Plains Project, and then Michael, who comes alongside and creates another documentary about the life-changing opportunity that this creates in our students. And when anybody who's been part of Adventure Media talks about, or the Great Plains Project for that matter, when they talk about that experience, they can't help but just sort of shine in the way that it has really been a transformative thing for them. And from your experience as someone who, you're not a student, you're not a Texas Tech grad, is that right?
Mm-hmm. No, I went there a year, and then I graduated in North Texas.
To come into that experience and be able to witness what growth is taking place in those students, like what is that experience like for you? Why is that something that is valuable to you to the point where you've been part of a lot of different experiential learning opportunities with Jerod? And it's not just about having fun. Like, there's a lot of real growth that takes place.
And these classes are work. And so Jerod and I joke that we've never taken a trip where we weren't working. We just like sat by the fire and chatted. It's not our nature. Always purposeful. And that's these trips. So these trips and this Texas Tech's programs have been transformative for me because I was restarting my writing career as I wrote about Adventure Media for bikepacking.com. It was my second paid story back writing. First one was with Jerod, Texas Parks and Wildlife. And then bikepacking.com, I had reached out to them about this class that Jerod taught. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. Mm. And so that was my second paid gig. And so I've kind of evolved as a new old writer with some of these students that were starting their careers. Yeah. Maddie Walker, she filmed the motorcycle trip that Jerod and I did across Texas. She shot that for PBS. She just shot it freelance, and Jerod had already been working with Texas Parks and Wildlife PBS for the documentary, and basically got that connection for her. And Justin Rex was on that first trip, and Justin Rex and I have worked on 3 different stories now, and he's coming out here this afternoon to work with me on another story that we're doing together. And Simon, I mean, I've said before that I don't think I would maintain this writing career 2.0 if I hadn't fallen into Texas Tech and been nourished by the creative energy of all the young people I meet. Yeah. And whenever I talk to them, I like, and I'm constantly defending this Generation Z and even millennials. I'm Generation X. I'm 53, and so there's a lament of like, these kids, they get participation trophies, and they, when we were young, we left our houses on our bikes and then come home to the street lights. I mean, I've talked to these kids and they have the same experiences. I got a participation trophy for soccer. I mean, that's not new. Everything is highlighted now from social media, but the students that I have worked with, some really, really talented, hardworking, non-complaining. I mean, we live in dirt for 5 days when we do Adventure Media, the bicycle bike-packing trip. No one complains. I mean, we'll be tired and hungry.
Sure.
I think sometimes I'm tireder and hungrier than the students. I mean, they just go. They just pack their backpacks full of
Yeah.
gummy worms, and they'll eat more food than I've ever seen. I'm like, where do y'all keep getting this food? But it's been life-changing to be a part of, and I can't think of a better ambassador than someone that didn't go to Texas Tech, and how much I love Texas Tech now, and how I've coined this thing, I've said it over and over, about Texas Tech and West Texans and people up here in the Panhandle, that people in West Texas don't know what they can't do. And that's kind of the spirit of Texas Tech is,
You find a way.
we're going to do experiential. We're going to take kids across the United States, following two guys on motorcycles on a shoestring budget. We're going to sleep on the ground for 15 days.
Yeah. And you have students line up to be like, that's it.
Yeah.
And I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
And you had said it too in a really nice way that truly is a life-changing experience for a lot of these students. And Shaylin and I mean, we were talking about that when we were driving out here this morning, because she's been part of Great Plains Project and she was also part of Adventure Media. And she said, I almost wish that I could like go back and do it again, or that I could do Adventure Media, a second time, because it was a stepping stone that like led her into understanding more about who she is, right? And I think that a lot of those students, they encounter that where it's like they just learn so much about themselves and they learn about who they are, but they also learn about what they can do. And Justin Keene, who is a professor previously of that course, he had talked about too, like, you can do hard things. And I think that people just learn that when they're in that environment. And like you said, it's so minimalistic. Like basically all you have is each other, right? It's just such a unique experience. And I am proud too of Texas Tech and their ability to kind of not only create these opportunities for students, but to have that be the template that creates more experiential learning opportunities for students. And the Great Plains Project is kind of born out of the success that they experienced with Adventure Media, which is really cool. I think it shows a lot of future growth of where Texas Tech wants to go. And the College of Media and Communication has kind of created landscape for that.
Yeah. Texas up here in the South Plains, kind of on its own. And so there's no preconceived notions. Like you go to UT, there's this expectation. You go to A&M, there's huge expectations of like, this is what you have to be. There's no, idea of what you're supposed to be as a Red Raider other than free spirit. Mm-hmm. Do what you want, do what moves you, and figure it out. And like, I think as a professional that's been a writer for a while now, and a writer back in there, I've kind of seen different variations of the magazine business, and I've learned that no one really knows what they're doing. So just do it. And that's the prime thing of Jerod is we just do it. We just figure it out.
Like the pioneering mindset.
Exactly. Yeah. And my granddad was that way. If he needed a weed burning torch and he saw it in the Sears and Roebuck catalog, he just built it. Because you didn't have Amazon, and that's people still do that. I talk about Buddy Holly and Mac Davis, the music that has come out of Texas, and oddly enough, I was driving up. I'm old, so I still listen to my iPhone library. I don't do Apple Music or Spotify. Every year, everyone gets their Spotify. I don't, mine's my podcast. That's what I get, that I listen to. But Buddy Holly, Every Day came on, and that song is so bizarre and different for the time, and even now. So it's got it's not an xylophone. It's a glycograph. It's a strange instrument, that do the pings. And then Mac Davis wrote for Elvis Presley in the Ghetto. So this area just makes some fiercely independent, unique people that listen to their own voice. And I think Texas Tech harbors that. I think that's the ethos of Texas Tech is it just spurs individuals that aren't afraid to work hard, know the rules, abide by the rules, but push the limits. And I love it. And that's, like I said, I think this writing career 2.0, I would have stopped if I had not been in this group. Because now I'm accountable. I work with these students. They see me as a writer. A lot of times they interview me. They come to me for advice. I'm like, I don't know if I have the best advice for you, but we push each other. And sometimes I feel accountable. I'm like, I need to live up of their expectations of me. Mm-hmm. So I need to push myself. And man, Great Plains Project, pushed me to the limit. I mean, we all worked our tails off. And sometimes I felt like I was having a hard time keeping up. I even told the group, day 3. So we were doing these dispatches for the PBS, the radio station, NPR. And I mean, I was struggling. I told them, I said, I am overwhelmed right now, guys. And I think they all felt the same thing. We all did. Jerod was knackered. I mean, you can see it in his eyes, those first 3 days of getting out of Texas. So it just having, especially as a writer, it's an act of solitude. You know, you sit in your room to have these collaborators and to kind of have an idea of what the next generation wants and needs and their desires. I think it gives me an edge with other writers.
Yeah. Well, what in particular was overwhelming about it? Was it just the fact that like we're doing, there's so much going on. We're trying to do all these different things, and we're writing and we're doing photos and 2 documentaries and
yeah. So Jerod and I were talent, basically. You know, we were featured in the show. So,
which is a weird place for a creative to be too. It's like when you go on to the other side, it's just like a transition. You have to like change your mindset.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I've discovered that I'm an introvert. And the first time I did adventure media, I was interviewed and someone asked me about the landscape, and I just, actually said something about terroir. That's actually what the documentary became named. And I kind of fell in love with being the microphone and being on the camera. So I've always joked with Madison Walker about that. I really enjoy the camera. And she goes, I thought you were kidding until we had you on camera one time. So I've really grown to love it. And I thought as a creative, I thought this would be great. And it was great, but it was just a lot. And we were doing big miles the first 3 days to get out of Texas, like 340 miles a day, back roads. And these dispatches we were doing, they had to be 2 minutes long. And as a writer, it's difficult to be concise. It'd be like 380 words. And then I had to read that. And I learned real quick certain words I can't read or don't, you get to a word and you're like, I'm going to stumble on that. And so oddly enough, down the road, Sutherland became a weird, when I was recording that, Simon, I went down a rabbit hole of I couldn't say Sutherland over and over and over. So we were being on camera, and then we were interviewing people. So at the end of the day, we would have an interview scheduled with someone from that region of the plains, and Jerod and I would interview them, and it would be filmed. And then we would get to camp, and Simon, camera in our face, interviewing us, asking us the day. And then we would go to our tents, and I would write these dispatches, and Jerod would edit photos. I'd go to bed at 1 o'clock, and then we were getting up at 6.
Oh, my.
And, sleeping on the ground was not that big a deal. I had a great pillow, invested in a good camp pillow. And so I always slept well, but I would wake up and just be, and as you get older, it gets a little harder to not have good sleep. And it was just a lot. We were just moving. And then, the dispatches we found out were going to run, because we thought they were going like the next week. So we needed to keep them going. But once we learned that they decided to push them till we got back, it took a little pressure off, and that eased up. And the trip found its rhythm. So that was it was just go, go, go. And there was a couple of times where I got out of my tent, and Shaylin was there with the camera, and I'm like, all right, we're doing this again, are we? So I was kind of like, I got what I wanted. I'm on camera all the time, but now I miss it.
Yeah.
No one's got a camera on me when I get out of bed at my house.
I know. You were the center of attention for, 3 whole weeks? That's how long the trip was? Almost 4?
Yeah. It was the end of the day interviews, and then the interview, and then trying to write dispatches. Because once you do an interview, and they would go on a long time. They were like an hour and a half, and you're on, and then you have to be interviewed.
Yeah.
So that was, but man, it sure was fun.
And you had kind of talked a little bit about it, but it just is so tremendously like physically taxing, right? Like it just requires so much attention, especially with what you guys are doing, the long stretches, and you can't, especially I don't ride motorcycles, but I assume that you really it requires a lot of mental focus. What is the way that you feel like you What did you do to kind of make sure that you were still able to, throughout that 3 or 4 week period, like still be centered, still be grounded, still be, productive in what you're doing? It's so physically and mentally and emotionally like tough to do that day after day after day. It's such a grind. How do you make that like sustainable, I guess?
Yoga. So I packed a travel yoga mat. My wife's a yoga instructor. We owned a yoga studio in Snyder. And I, oddly enough, was practicing yoga from like DVDs before I met my wife. So I've got a racing background. I raced cars. And so I would do yoga like the night before a race and just kind of center myself. And it was just watching a video. It wasn't even like serious yoga. And then my wife got certified in the early 2000s. And when we lived in Colorado, she taught. So yoga is just always, and I've moved my whole life. I've done triathlons, and right now my hips are just on fire all the time. And, I haven't overused my body, but yoga is, I think about people who don't stretch. Mm-hmm. I'm like, how do you feel? Because I feel pretty beat up, and I do yoga. I don't do it every day, I would like to say it, but yoga, getting up, and when we had time, sometimes I chose to sleep rather than get up. But there's a couple of mornings I got up and did yoga by the lake, and got really centered and just got my hips opened up and moved my body. And then the other thing, since we weren't on bikes, I don't think Jerod and I have ever gone more than a couple of days without riding a bicycle or some sort of movement. And I actually ran one morning with one of our students, Adele Clark. She's on the track team. And so she would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and run. So I had a goal of at least one time of running with her, and I did. And the other thing we did, I told Jerod probably day 2, I was like, when we get off the motorcycles, let's do 10 push-ups and 10 bodyweight squats. And we did that once or twice, and he was like, let's just run. Why have we got to do this? And that became, because we get off the bikes all the time. We'd get off the bike and we'd regroup with the crew. And so I was like, let's just do, throughout the day, let's do 200 bodyweight squats on the motorcycles. Wow. Someone asked me, what's the difference between a bodyweight squat and a squat? I go, well, it's just your body weight. I don't know. But so on the motorcycles, we would, throughout the day, we'd knock out, say we leave camp and head to breakfast, we'd knock out 30, and it looks silly. There's 2 guys in gear, doing just, you sit down, you open up. I mean, but you want to talk about a lifesaver, because sometimes you'd get really tired on the motorcycle, like sleepy, like you're like, I'm engaged in this machine with no seatbelt. I could close my eyes and go to sleep.
Oh gosh.
And that doesn't seem possible, but 30 bodyweight squats later, you're good to go. and I'm going to brag on myself and throw Jerod under the bus. There's a couple of days you'd get like 180 in or 170, and then we'd get to camp and you just got busy. We'd either cook, talk to Simon every day on the camera. I wouldn't get 200. Well, those rolled over the next morning into my squats. So I'd have to do 230. Jerod said, no, my counter resets every day. So there's a couple of days I did like 230 the next day or 250. And it did. That was great. Wish I'd done more push-ups. And there's a couple of times I think we were doing a production meeting before we started. My wife and I have this thing. It's a common thing that people do. It's a squat, jump, push-up ladder. So you do 10 squat jumps, 1 push-up, and then you just reverse 9. And so I just bust that out. I don't know if it's an old guy thing, but I remember seeing older guys do stuff like that. And you're like, it's just weird. But you got to keep moving.
Body emotion stays in motion. Yep. And that is, I just think about you guys are putting in like 16, 17 hours a day, sometimes more than that. And to still just be able to like know that your body is the most important tool and you have to help it do the thing that you're trying to accomplish here. Like that's admirable, honestly. I don't know the last time that I did 200 squats in a day. So you've got me beat by a landslide. As I'm listening to you kind of tell the story, I just keep thinking back to, your granddad, teaching you about motorcycles and you as a young boy, 8 years old, like learning how to, ride one and falling sort of in love with that passion. And I just think about how special it is for you to kind of be able to like, it's almost like a tribute to him and someone who's important to you to be able to like bring them alongside you and have them come alongside you in this like really unique, special life experience of the Great Plains Project.
Yeah.
That's really special.
Yeah. And so I'll go, it's not like I ride a motorcycle all the time, but it's something that's always there for me. And I do track days. I've ridden the Formula One track in Austin many, many times on a, as they say, crotch rocket. I don't like that term, but the motorcycles since I bought this adventure bike when we moved back to Texas to do this trip on. We were planning to do the trip across Texas. I mean, Jerod and I have been talking about it along the River Road in Big Bend, or anytime we were driving or doing something, we would start planning this trip out. How are we gonna make this happen? How are we gonna get someone to pay us to do this? Texas Parks and Wildlife, I've got a great relationship with them, and they finally said, let's do it. And then next thing I know, PBS is on it. And that's the kind of synergy that Jerod produces.
Yeah.
And I joke, and I think we all of us that know him have spent time with him, and his name is mentioned on my podcast a million times, and you're like, well, is he in love with Jerod? Is there some sort of infatuation? And the thing is about the guys that no ego. It's really annoying. Like no ego at all. I mean,
and he could have it.
He could.
It'd be so easy.
But when we do these programs, it's all about the students. When we get done, I'm exhausted. I'm like, I'm ready to crawl in my tent. He's still teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I've pitched a story on Jerod Foster, the true Carpe Diem, that special movie and motivational teacher that really exists, but no ego.
Yeah.
All he wants to do is tell the story and make the students think like this. And he's been doing it for a long time. I just picked up on it. Like, we're not in the middle of nowhere because someone lives here. We're in the middle of somewhere. Mm. Or look where you brought yourself. Not where I brought you, where you took yourself. And so I feel fortunate to have connected with him and be a part of this universe of Texas Tech. And I like to say we're like this special team of creatives, telling stories.
Yeah. And it's this team that sort of perpetuates beyond these experiences and these experiential learning classes and beyond Texas Tech. You're talking about Maddie Walker, who has gone into her career, and Tanner Fowler, who's in his career, and Justin and Michael, and all these people who you've met through this class, but that you still have a relationship with, because like when you live that life experience together, it just creates a bond that's far and beyond that adventure media class or that Great Plains Project. And we had talked about this a little bit earlier. We talked to a lot of people about adventure media, and they just say, God, it just changed me. It changed my life, and it changed my course. And anybody who listens to the Fearless podcast, you know that in season 3, we featured that 2023 adventure media class, and when they went and did the monumental loop. And there's this really like beautiful quote that you have kind of toward the end of that episode where you're talking about how, meeting Jerod and sort of your introduction to some of the things that he was doing, it kind of created, this break in your 10-year span of not writing. And it like brought you to a place where it sort of resurrected that in you. And you've obviously talked about it a little bit here, but what happened that started that 10-year break from writing?
A writer without a deadline is a procrastinator. It's just, so I never grew up wanting to be a writer, but it was always something that I read motorcycle magazines from an early age. And so by the time I was like in 6th grade, I could read at a 12.9 grade level. I mean, I could just always read because I read motorcycle. And it sounds silly and almost frivolous, but it taught me tongue-in-cheek humor. It gave me this is before the internet, 1980 something, gave me an insight into Southern California culture. Mm. And I just thought it was a cool deal. And I was like, and I would see movies about writers, and I'm like, man, I would really relate, but I didn't journal. And I was terrible in English class. God, you talk about diagramming sentences, just make my brain scrambled. But I got into college and I fell in love with, this is from movies, it's copywriting. I wanted to be a copywriter. You'd see these movies in the 80s and 90s about the advertising copywriter and the brainstorming. They lived in a loft apartment. So I've just always been drawn to writing. And actually I had a drama teacher, the great Jerry Worsham, has the the most UIL winning streak of any football coach. They've won the one act play more times than anybody.
Anyone who knows about Snyder one act play.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we
Awesome.
competed against them in high school. They're a truly remarkable program.
Yeah, when I went to Austin after I graduated and saw the reverence that people had for Snyder, because I wasn't a drama kid. I was just in drama classes. And we did a writing program one time, or like a workshop where we sat in the auditorium at Worsham. The auditorium was named after Worsham while he was alive. It was crazy to me. But I was in the drama class, and we set up in the auditorium, and he put on classical music over the PA system, and he said, just write whatever comes to your mind. And there was probably 15 or 20 of us in the class. He said, you can't sit next to each other. And I just wrote. It just flowed out, which it doesn't flow out of me now. And later, maybe a year later, he told me, he goes, I keep everything you write. I go, why? He goes, because I know you're going to be a writer someday. And that never even crossed my mind, but I was always drawn to it. And went to college, majored in advertising, wrote for the school paper, was really good at it, but never thought anything about it. I mean, I'd have stuff in it was a student class, and so you just wrote, and I had a beat, and I just had stuff in the paper all the time. And in fact, my friends would be like, hey, you got another story in the school paper. I'm like, oh.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because I had other ideas of what I wanted to be, and I just never thought about being a journalist. And I graduated, and I was on an airplane sitting next to a freelance writer, and she wrote for this motorcycle magazine in San Francisco. And she said, I've always wanted to do that. It all culminated in that moment. It's like, I think I'd like to write for some sort of magazine. And she goes, you should. You're more qualified than me, because I had told her that I had written in school. And I came home and started pitching magazines.
Wow.
Second pitch was to Texas Parks and Wildlife on adventure racing, and I got it. And it was about an adventure race in Cedar Hill State Park. And whenever I reached out to the event promoter, he said, well, there's this website, mountainzone.com, and they need someone to write a race report. Would you do that? I go, yeah, I got 2 jobs. This is easy. And, so my first paycheck was for a website. It was $100, which oddly enough, that's about what websites pay now. Still, it's like $100.
Yeah.
They don't pay anything. Some pay better than others. And I started writing. I became an adventure writer. And I wrote about the Buffalo Springs Half Ironman in Lubbock. Did a great story on it. Paladura Ultra Marathon. But I had this book that I had started in a fiction class in college. I really wanted to finish it. And I'm like, this freelance writing, just 2 different beasts. And I'm like, I want to finish this book. I'm going to stop freelance. I'm going to stop pitching and finish this book. And a writer without deadlines is a procrastinator. And I just procrastinated myself into not finishing the book. It's halfway finished. And lost that connection because it's hard to pitch, especially then you wrote an actual letter.
Yeah.
You put your clips in, you send it off. Now you email. And I just lost that muscle. And luckily I had I wanted to build a house and bought some land and became addicted to that, and got married. And I'm like, I want a big piece of land, and then I built my writing studio, and I'm going to have this big piece of land. I'm going to write. Never wrote. I sort of wrote in that studio, and got to a point where I go, I need to sell this place if I want to be who I want to be. And so it wasn't quite that easy. And my wife and I had some wanderlust, and we wanted to get out and travel, and so I sold my dream property. We moved into an Airstream trailer and started traveling the country, and still wasn't writing. We moved to Colorado, and I started working, and I would meet other writers in Colorado. I'm like, I got to start again. Because they weren't better than me. I mean, I'm like, you're writing? You're like, they'd come in and ask for free stuff. I worked at a place that made backpacking bags. And so writers would come in. It's like, hey, if you give me a bag, I'll write a review on it. Yeah, it's the worst.
Yeah.
And I pitched to Texas Parks and Wildlife a great story about bikepacking, and had been following Jerod on Instagram. Didn't know him from anybody. And pitched the story about a bikepacking trip through Central Texas. And the editor said, yeah, let's do it. And I said, well, hey, would you mind if I use Jerod Foster to take the photos? And they go, well, yeah, he'll do it. Because I had pitched him as a part of the story, just someone I would interview.
Yeah.
So my first story back, I'm already selecting photographers. Luckily, Louis Bond knew Jerod, and
that's a good reference to slip in there. Hey, I know Jerod Foster. He's going to be part of this.
Yeah. Well,
People in the industry, they just know him.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even know he'd do it. And so I contacted him on his website, and this is me typing right here. And he said, heck yeah. He didn't know me from anybody, but the company I worked for had a lot of clout, and he respected them. And we met for the first time at Mother Neff State Park, November 2018. And it's been history ever since.
It's awesome.
And so I quit writing to finish a book, never finished the book.
But it brought you so much more in turn whenever you
started it.
Yeah.
And I've said that he and I've talked about it. It's like, it'd be really nice if I had not stopped writing. And he says, well, you'd be too big for us at that. If you'd kept writing, you'd be big league. I said, well, I don't know. But I like this version, and I don't want to be anywhere else. And so I'm almost happy I stopped so I could be in this universe right now with these group of people, with Shaylin, with KP, with Maddie, with Hannah. I mean, all these kids that I've worked with and am just inspired by. It's great. I wish I was a little bit younger, but, you can't hack life. I mean, you can try, but you can't hack experience. And if I were 22, I'd be different. I would not be as hardworking as these students.
They are special.
They are. I tell them all the time, when I was 22, I would have never done this. I was too scared.
Yeah.
So it took me, to get to the name of the podcast, Fearless, it took me to my 50s to be fearless, to just not care, to love the camera, to the microphone. I enjoy the podcast. That's like my new passion. I love speaking on the microphone.
You do great.
Yeah.
I love the Tinstreamer podcast. It's great. And we're actually going to link to it here in the show notes if you want to listen to it. It's really great. And the stories that you're telling there are really important because you are telling real life of real people and their ambitions and their work and their adventures. And obviously you do that in your writing, but you do that well in the way that you sort of draw out life experiences from the people that you talk to. And Eddie, you interview Eddie on one of your episodes, and he was part of the most recent Great Plains project. But yeah, it's just really, we talk a lot on this podcast, and we interviewed the lead singer of Flatland Cavalry a few weeks ago, and he, we just talk about how important it is to share our gifts with people, and you are in a uniquely important situation because you have the ability to present a platform for people to tell their own life experience and to tell their own story, and it's just a really cool opportunity to be able to take advantage of. It's special to be in a position where you get to elevate the voices around you.
Wow, you do the same thing. I mean, it's
an empowering feeling because you're offering that to somebody who might otherwise not have the ability to let their story be known.
Yeah,
it's special.
That's something this generation has taught me is they don't ask for permission and they don't wait to be told they can do something. And you just create your own pirate ship. I've stole that from another podcaster, but no one's going to give you your show. No one's going to say, hey, Brandon, late nights open back up. I want you to be the host. That was something I dreamt of as a kid. You just do it. You make your own show. You make the Tinstreamer show. You make the Fearless podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, and that name really resonates with me. We talk about my granddad and how special that he put me on a motorcycle as a kid because my grandparents were fearless. Because they lost their son on a motorcycle. He was 15 and died in an intersection on the way to the house. And my granddad continued to ride motorcycles. And when his grandkids were born, he put us on the most dangerous thing imaginable, and that's a three-wheeler. We were riding three-wheelers when we were kids.
Wow.
And my dad, we raced motocross for a little bit, and my dad was always scared of us getting hurt. But my granddad, the one that lost a son, life goes on. You live life. Things happen. You can die in the bathtub.
Sure.
But, the motorcycle, it's just, as Lance Armstrong said, it's not about the bike, but it is. I mean, it's just been, and on this trip, the Great Plains, golly, waking up and getting on that motorcycle and riding to either a breakfast joint or coffee. You know, sometimes we make breakfast. Man, you talk about, you know, freedom. It just and you're cold. You're actually a little bit uncomfortable, but you're so alive. And I had this thought of like, you know, you in a car, you can kind of let the machine do the work, and you kind of settle in, and you're almost a passenger. The motorcycle, you think, and it moves. So it's a part of you. You know, it's an appendage. And so, I mean, this trip, the Great Plains is about bicycles.
Yeah.
It is a bicycle route. But I feel very, very blessed that I got to do it on a motorcycle with my good friend, with my chosen university, Texas Tech. And if I see a Red Raider, you know, somewhere in the Metroplex, and I start talking, I start telling them about all these programs. Oh. Sometimes they don't get it. And I know other universities don't understand when you talk about adventure media or the Junction class, the other, you know, there's a slew of programs at Tech that do this, that do experiential learning. Brian Gimza, I've sat down with him, and he's got some neat stuff going on. But I don't think other universities, I think they see these programs, they think, oh, it's just like an outdoor pursuits thing. Mm-hmm. It's a fun trip. No. I mean, these are all working, interviewed a student, you know, so I'm doing some sort of writing thing for Texas Tech for Great Plains. If it's going to be in Evermore. So I've interviewed Shaylin and talked to Anna Walker, who came to Texas Tech from Richardson. She looked at UT, and she came to Texas Tech because of adventure media, because she wants to be in action sports.
And that's the future of those classes. That's the future, is that like this is such a huge marketing opportunity to bring people in to Texas Tech, and for people who don't know anything else about our university, if they hear about this class and they hear the testimonies of the people who are part of it, it's so real, and it's so true, and it just creates this like visceral response of individuals that want to come and be part of it. And it doesn't matter what their background is, and it doesn't matter where they come from, but it's such a unique tool, because it just brings people in and it brings people together. And that's, I think, something that's what Texas Tech is really all about.
Yeah, that's great. And like I said, I'm super objective. I didn't go to school here, and I think it's just the greatest university in the world.
Yeah,
maybe the universe. I don't know. I haven't been outside this.
Let's do it. For the sake of Fearless Unscripted, let's say it, in the universe. What makes you excited about just the future of courses like this that are offered by the university, offered by the College of Media and Communication? And what makes you excited about just the future of Texas Tech as we continue on the landscape of just providing these types of experiences to students?
Because you're producing real content creators, not in the sense of the Instagram, TikTok content creator. Because that's candy for your brain, that type of social media content. And it's got its place, but what Texas Tech is doing is really important filmmaking. You know, we talk about Mike Ortiz. Mike Ortiz is a very, very talented shooter. I mean, talk about the motorcycle being an appendage. Him and his camera. The camera is an appendage.
Yeah.
I've watched him just flow with it.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you know, Texas Tech is producing what we think is being lost with AI. We think the AI is going to start telling these stories. And I was actually, I live 4 hours from the ranch. I live in Bluffdale, which is between Stephenville and Granbury. So I had some time to think about sitting down with you and what I would say and my clever quips. You know, how am I going to be impressive on this?
I appreciate your preparation.
Oh man, I watched the Cleto, the interview with him. They said Cleto.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yep.
Flatland Cavalry is completely new to me. They're so big. And I guess it's my age and not being in college, but I'm just, they're playing at Red Rocks. I mean, we thought about going to see them at Dickey's Arena, because for New Year's Eve. But Justin Rex said, you and your wife will be the youngest people there, or the oldest people there. So we're kind of like, Allison was like, ouch. But anyways, back to what Texas Tech is making. Future storytellers that have a foot in the social media world and growing up with phones, I think it gives them a unique perspective to tell these stories in an analog way. I mean, this is digital, but not using AI.
Yeah.
Talking to people, like what you're doing, talking to me and talking to Cleto and KP and some of the other podcasts I watch you do. it's tactile, real world experience in telling stories, telling human, real stories, the human experience that we all share. Mm-hmm. AI will never, ever mimic that. I think people are fearful that that's happening, but the more we have students that are embedding in the dirt, sleeping on the ground, riding bicycles, living with each other, the more it spurs this real life experience that needs to be told. You know, like Ken Burns does. I mean, he shot a whole documentary of the Civil War where he, invented the whole painting process. I mean, we have moving pictures. So I just, these programs where people are getting out of the classroom. Classroom's very important because you got to learn your structure and your basics, but getting in the field and going places and having to live with your peers.
You can't replace it.
No,
you can't replace it in a classroom.
I have so much hope and I've said, whenever I talk to people my age, I'm like, this next generation is better than us. You may get on your Instagram and talk about, well, Gen X, we smoked cigarettes and fought each other. That's a trend I see going on and on. I'm like, look, the kids that I work with, that I spend time with, they're better than us. They're harder workers and they're smarter. Spend too much time on their phones, but we all do. Everybody does it.
Yeah. You were right at the beginning of the podcast. You said that you were good being on camera, and you were right. You were great. You're great in what you do for your own platforms. You were great for this podcast, and I just thank you for being the walking endorsement that you are for Texas Tech and for our university as a whole, and for programs like this that are really important. I just really appreciate you being part of Fearless Unscripted.
I appreciate being here, and I know we probably went a little long because I was like, I'm going to talk too much.
That's okay, me too.
But we know that's how that goes.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you coming all the way out here to the ranch.
It's lovely. I really enjoy it, and I wish that we could find a way to if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put a couple of shots in there so that people can see how beautiful the landscape is out here.
Yeah, I'll take you all to some spots to let everyone know, because this is remote. Did you expect it to be this remote?
Well, I wasn't. Michael kind of gave us a little bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a
synopsis?
No, like a anyway, Michael told us when we were coming in here that it was going to be a little bit remote, and he was asking if I had 4-wheel drive, and I was like, well, the Jeep's got 4-wheel drive, so we should be good. But I wasn't sure what to expect. But I have been out in this area a little bit before, and so it's just awesome. And you had mentioned freedom, and it really is. It just makes you feel free, and it makes you feel thankful for the land out here. Well,
and my last thought, Simon Parmill, I've kind of honed this as a pitch for maybe a PBS show, but to me, the Caprock is like a metaphor for the people of this area. And I said it early on, it looks featureless, it looks uninteresting, it's just a palisade, a bluff. But you get in it and explore it, it is full of infinite wonders.
Yeah.
And that's the people here, full of infinite wonders and possibility.
That's awesome. That's a perfect way to close this episode. If you want to listen to that episode that we talked about earlier of Adventure Media from 2023, we'll put a link here as well. It's called Shifting Gears, Season 3, Shifting Gears. This has been lovely, and you're lovely, and I just appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much.
This
has been a lot of fun.
It has been one of my favorite episodes of Fearless Unscripted, for sure. This has been Brandon Weaver, Fearless Unscripted. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.